The exhibition is made up of a series of videos and still photographs that both I've taken with my own camera, but also archival images that I've sourced. The archives have come from the American National Archives. It's all declassified military material, and that material was often used in propaganda type newsreel footage, and a lot of it was used in a propaganda documentary called The Last Bomb, which justified the use of atomic weapons. So the work is made up of the stories of 4 people that I worked with over a period of time. And these 4 people are from America, which is Ben Kuroki. He is a Japanese American. And from Tokyo, Mrs. Ebana. And also from Tottori City, which is in the lower part of Japan. His name is Mr. Murakami. And then also from Okinawa, and her name is Mrs. Urahara. One of the questions I get asked the most about my work is why, as a Pakeha woman, I'm so interested in this particular history, and this history being the Asia-Pacific War of World War II. I have a deep and personal connection to Japan, and that connection has enabled me to think and reflect on that history, and certainly on the way I was taught it as a young person. It's made me reflect on why we weren't taught more about the history of that war that happened right in our kind of community in our area. The work is not pro-Japan, and it's not pro-America either. It's not trying to take a side on this particular history in terms of who was right or who was wrong. In a sense, I'm really interested in the nuance of Japan's war atrocities, Japan's imperial atrocities, as well as America, and how they were really working in combat against each other. For example, the work that's behind me is a 2-part work, and it involves Mrs. Ebana talking about her story of experiencing or being a child during the Tokyo air raids. And then the second part of that story is Ben's experience of actually dropping the very same bombs that Mrs. Ebana is talking about. And what I was really trying to do is make a connection between these 2 really quite polarizing positions. So one person who experienced the air raids and the other person who dropped the bombs that caused that air raid. And really, again, what I'm interested in is the nuance. So not so much what happened or why it happened or who was right or who was wrong, but really how do we work with this history now? Let's start by talking about Mr. Murakami. So this is the only video where you see an actual human. And you can see right here, the framing is super, super tight. It's basically just his ear. And the reason for that is, so I met Mr. Murakami in a hotel room. He came and stayed in the same hotel that we were staying in. He's quite deaf. My Japanese is terrible. So I was working with Mami-san, who's an old friend of his. And basically, she was asking the questions and I was doing the filming and everything. And he kept rocking into frame, rocking towards the camera so that he could hear. And no matter how many times we asked him to sit back, and even I tried a wider frame, he just wouldn't sit still. He just kept coming into, to get a better sense of hearing. And I'm thinking while I'm filming it, oh my goodness, how am I going to work with this? And then what I ended up doing is realizing, well, actually, how can I just switch that framing and actually go into a tighter crop? Because what became really apparent is that the thing that he was showing us was his ear. And of course, the whole exhibition is really around this role of listening. So this video work here that involves Mr. Murakami is also paired with this archival image of a glove. And I got this image from the Canberra War Memorial Museum. And basically what it is a reconstruction of how the prisoners broke out of the camp. And they basically used these baseball gloves to climb over the fences. And during my meeting with Mr. Murakami, I showed him this image, as a sense of a memory jog, that kind of thing. And his first response was not to talk about the breakout or the trauma of that. The first thing he said was "natsakashi desu," which means it's like a Japanese word that encompasses nostalgia. And he was nostalgic for that sense of playing baseball with his buddies. In the video work, Mrs. Urahara tells the story of hiding in a cave, away from the Japanese as much as from the Americans. She was a little girl holding her baby brother. And she tells the story of how they were asked to leave the cave because the baby was crying and they'd get found out. After hearing that story, I met Mrs. Urahara at the Memorial Museum in Okinawa. And that memorial is on a piece of land where there's cliffs that go down to the beaches. And of course, on the cliffs are lots and lots of caves, and they're the caves that people hid in. And I didn't want to photograph in a cave. I felt it would be incredibly disrespectful because of the spirits that reside there. And so what I did is I photographed from the outside, looking into this expanse of darkness. That blackness connects to what she was talking about. And then equally, this image here is taken on the cliff tops where the memorial is. And basically those cliff tops are where civilians jumped to avoid capture from Americans, basically. One of the things I'm interested in terms of the whole exhibition is the role that memorial plays, particularly state, official memorial, like who gets to memorialise, whose stories are remembered. And one of the things that's really interesting about the Tokyo air raids, so 100,000 people died in a single air raid, is that there's no official public memorial for it. And Mrs. Ebner, who I worked with, who told me her story about the Tokyo air raids, she has developed her own private memorial. And this image of a tree is an example. It's not her memorial, but it's an example of a private memorial, a small memorial that's very near where she lives. And so these kinds of memorials for the Tokyo air raids are all over Tokyo, particularly East Tokyo. You just have to look for them. I'm really interested in documentary, but I'm interested in it in the sense of challenging what is documentary and challenging what can be considered a document. So in my work, the documents don't really function as evidence. Rather, they're a way in, a connection. And often that connection, the imagery is beautiful. It's beautiful light. And I'm interested in how that holds you in the moment, holds you in your feeling relationship to what you're listening to.